Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, the 11th installment in the Fire Emblem franchise, is a remake of the first FE game, Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, with Blade of Light. While FE3 Book 1 did contain a remake of FE1 as well, there were some cut chapters and missing recruitable characters, leading for it to not be a completely faithful remake. One thing you may notice if you look at any thread involving Fire Emblem opinions is that people tend to rate Shadow Dragon pretty poorly, often putting it near the bottom of their rankings or even at the very bottom. However, I have the complete opposite opinion. I find that Shadow Dragon is one of the best FE games out there, as well as among my favorite games ever. Other remakes throughout FE's history have been rather questionable to me in terms of things they tried to add and get rid of. Shadows of Valencia kept Gaiden's bland map design, but got rid of infinite range staves, while also introducing some questionable new characters and a new plot that was not fantastic. New Mystery Emblem, on the other hand, while I do think it has fantastic gameplay, did ruin a lot of the charm and appeal for FE3 Book 2's story. Chris's existence is one to constantly absorb praise and take away from Marth's efforts, and his subplot is pretty lame as well. The game also throws far more recruitable characters at you just to satisfy some need to have every character in the world to be playable. Some of them are fine, like Roger, but a good amount of them, such as the whole Wolfguard and Michaelis, take away from the tone of the game, since in the original they face a far more grim fate. So, what about Shadow Dragon? Is it a faithful, well-done remake? The answer is yes. I find this game to be an absolutely amazing remake, an example of what all remakes should try to be. The new mechanics and story Shadow Dragon introduces are all quite welcome, while also not taking away from the original game at all. Let's get into why I love this game so much. First of all, FE11's map design is really good. This is in part to FE1 honestly having really good map design, being held back by the slow interface and some questionable enemy placement. Every map, besides Endgame, is Cease, which I personally believe to be the best and most interesting map objective. The goal of each map is to have Marth get to the front, while also having plentiful and well thought out side objectives. What adds to this is that Marth is the only unit who can visit villages. This leads to having to plan out his movement carefully, as with clever thief placements, the game urges you to rush these villages as quickly as possible with Marth. Another reason why I personally really enjoy the Siege objective is that it allows for the most diverse and creative ways to clear a map. Kill boss maps tend to involve throwing out your strongest mounted unit ahead of everyone else to kill the boss as soon as possible, while route maps can tend to be pretty mindless and involve send a strong unit into a pile of enemies and hit end turn. This can be pretty boring, especially on super huge maps, like in FE10. However, Siege can allow for many different strategies that can all effectively work. One big thing this game has to go with this is infinite range staves, with the main notable one being the Warp Staff. As long as a unit has C staves, you can arm any adjacent unit to anywhere on the map. This can lead to strategies that can allow you to beat a map in 1 to 2 turns. However, even if you don't intend to min-turn clear a map, Warp can still allow for many creative and helpful uses, such as warping a strong unit in range of a ton of enemies to make the path for Marth easier. Or situations where a unit far away would be in risk of dying, but if you warp someone across the map to help them, you can assist them and save a reset. This also gives extra utility to units who can use Fortify and Physic. Infinite range staves allow for so many different ways to play and handle a map, and that's why I'm always a huge advocate for them in any game they appear in. On the topic of many different ways to play and handle maps, let's discuss 2 of the new additions to Shadow Dragon, Forging and Reclassing. I'm a huge fan of both of these mechanics. When Forging was first introduced in Fire Emblem 9, Path of Radiance, I find that the way it's implemented here is far better compared to FE9 and FE10. In the Telly's games, you pick what forged weapon you want for a preset list of options, and adjust the might, hit, crit, and weight. In Shadow Dragon, however, you choose a weapon that you already own to upgrade. Besides some super special weapons like the Falchion, you can basically forge anything you have. You're able to forge effective weapons, killer weapons, and other strong weapons like the Wing Spear. While Telly's forging isn't inherently bad, there's 2 things I much prefer about the forging in Shadow Dragon. For one, being able to pick any weapon you want allows for more unique and specific uses, such as a super strong effective weapon to kill off certain bosses or really strong enemies. For high difficulties, these forged weapons are really appreciated. The second reason doesn't inherently have to do with the forging itself, but more so the economy in the game. Money is extremely plentiful in both FE9 and 10, besides maybe the exception of FE9 Maniac Mode, meaning you can be pretty mindless with forging a strong weapon each chapter to plow through the fairly weak enemies. But in Shadow Dragon, with money being a bit more tight, forging just generally costing more and higher enemy quality, this leads to the player actually having to manage their money when it comes to forging and make better decisions involving it. I feel like this is better and more interesting design, as it can result in attempting to earn more money through side objectives, stealing more useless weapons instead of hoarding, and other things to afford better forges. Alongside that, what makes forging such a great addition to me in this game is how it can effectively give any unit you want a boost. For a pretty good unit like Sheeta, if you forge her Wing Spirit, you can make her one of the best boss killing units in the whole series, due to the abundance of cavalry or armor units as bosses, not to mention being able to one-shot plenty of strong enemies. But even for units that may be considered mediocre or bad, like Esther Board, you could forge them a High Might Rider's Bane or Hammer, allowing for them to have a strong niche and one-shot tough enemies, or a super buff Iron or Steel weapon to help their combat normally and make them easier to raise. To put it another way, you can make strong units even better with forges and weaker units up to a higher level and make them more adequate. I find this to be pretty interesting design to help with unit balance. Now that we've gone in depth about forging, let's go into the other mechanic I mentioned earlier, reclassing. Unlike in Awakening or Fates, instead of using an item reclass, you have free access to reclassing at the start of Chapter 4 through the Preparations menu. Each unit is set into a specific class set A or class set B, which determines which classes they're able to change to. What I find really fun about reclassing is it can allow for creative solutions for chapters, as well as being able to potentially help with a unit's weakness and make a meteor more useful. For instance, if a map has a lot of ballista, then you can change your flyers, like Sheeta and Minerva, into a paladin or some other class instead. But it's not like these changes would come cost free. For instance, Minerva would lose access to her high axe weapon rank, and both would lose their ability to travel over all terrain. Weighing in which options would be more important is something I find to be super cool and adds another layer of thought to the game. With the weapon triangle being added back in this game, paying attention to what weapons you'll have access to is actually relevant. Another unique thing about reclassing is that it can help salvage units as well. For instance, in a game without reclassing, let's say you get a horrible armored or archer unit. They're stuck that way the whole game, meaning they're going to have to put up with their terrible classes, movement, stats, and so on, the whole game. But in this game, if you have that same unit, you can change their class to something a lot more useful to give them a better niche, access to better stats and movement, and so on. Don't get me wrong, it's not a perfect solution. Depending on what you reclass into, you may have to deal with a poor E rank base in your weapon type, leaving access to only iron weapons until you build your way up. But with forges and the arm scroll stat booster, this can be managed. So overall, I find it's a great way to try and make any unit you want more viable. Even ignoring all the practical uses, reclassing is just super fun to mess around with. For a whole playthrough, I used a Draco Knight warrior who has a whopping 10% strength growth, and she turned out great. It was extremely funny seeing her take out Michaelis, her big brother. They don't even have a battle conversation, because I'm sure they didn't imagine that she'd ever be fighting him. For another thing Shadow Dragon added, this game actually has difficulty options now, 5 of them, and I find it to be a super welcome addition. Hard 5, the most difficult mode, is one of the most challenging things that's ever come out of the FE franchise, up there with other super challenging games such as Conquest Lunatic, FE12 Hard 4, and so on. And for what it is, I find to be pretty damn well done and properly challenging. With the exception of the first 3 bosses and the final boss, each map is super well designed in terms of relative enemy strength to your own, making objectives more difficult and interesting to go for, and so on. They also make it so you can't just throw one super strong unit and expect to mindlessly steamroll each map, like Seth in FE8 or Realm in Birthright. This game still gives you really good tools, however, with reclassing, infinite range saves, forging, and so on to be able to handle these things. However, even if you're not wanting the ultimate challenge from the game, Part 2 through 4 can still provide pretty challenging and engaging gameplay, depending on what you're looking for. All these difficulty options can also allow for tons of replayability, which is always fun. A good change Shadow Dragon made is how promotion items work. While in the original game, each class had their own promotion item, like in the GBA games for instance, their distribution was rather flawed and questionable. For instance, you don't get your first Elysian Whip until Chapter 19, in a game with 25 chapters. You also don't get your first Bishop's Ring, the equivalent of the Guiding Ring, until that same chapter. That's just absurd. What I didn't even mention is that some classes couldn't even be promoted in FE1, like Armor Knights and Fighters. Thankfully, FE11 fixed that and changed the specific promotion items into a general one that every class uses, like how they work in FE5. While it was kind of a given due to reclassing existing and not having general ones would make things messy, I can still appreciate the change it gives to gameplay. Being able to promote anyone at any time gives a lot more flexibility to your options, rather than being forced to wait forever to promote a second unit that just happens to share the same class as someone else, like what can happen in FE6 with the Hero Quest as well as the Knight's Crest. One thing you might not be aware of is that Shadow Dragon also added supports. While they don't have the typical conversations like seen in the GBA games, you still receive passive boosts for having a pair of units within 2 to 3 spaces of each other after they've been deployed for a certain amount of maps, like how supports build in FE9. A unique factor is that these supports can also actually be one way, like how they are in FE3 or FE5, rather than all being mutual. A lot of people have shared their immense dislike for not having support conversations in the game. It's arguably the most common complaint I see about this game. While I can understand being disappointed that they're not around, I find it pretty ridiculous to call a game bad for this. It's not like having support conversations automatically means they're going to be of high quality writing. I find it better to value having a character's developments in the actual story or through events you're more likely to see, rather than being forced to have 2 units sit next to each other for 100 turns. I'm in the boat of mainly caring about supports for the way it impacts the gameplay, which is why I really like the way supports work in FE3 and FE5. While you don't have the bonuses right off the bat in this game, being able to get them just by deploying the 2 units in each map is as free as it can get, which is good enough for me. On the topic of complaints about Shadow Dragon, another common one is about the addition of guided maps in this game. Unlike in FE6 or 7, the way you unlock guided maps is by having lower than 15 units at the end of certain chapters or a special requirement for the final one. This means in order to purposely unlock them, you'd have to sacrifice your units, outside of using a special pack. What makes it so weird to complain about them is that they're purely extra maps that you don't need to experience. The purpose of them is to try and help out people who actually lose a ton of units during maps, as it gave up replacement units within these chapters. So if you don't lose units, why would you worry about going to them? If you really want to play them normally, consider it some kind of challenge to unlock them and sacrifice the amount of needed units per chapter. This game does give a good amount of party units that you don't really care about. It would be a pretty unique way to play the game. While I can get the feeling of, man, I'm missing out on content, I still feel like it's not a good enough reason to be as harsh on the game as some people. Not playing the 5 extra maps won't make you lose sleep. On to the last thing I haven't touched upon, the story. I'm gonna be honest, I don't play FE for the story. While I can definitely respect and appreciate the good parts of a story, and in some cases the story can even elevate my own favorites, like for FE3 and FE5, the most important factor for me is the gameplay. If an FE game has bad or middling gameplay, I'm gonna dislike the game as a whole. While FE12 and Conquest have questionable or even bad plots, those games are among my favorites in the whole series. Same for FE6, which to this day is my second favorite FE game. I love these games so much because I find a majority of their maps to be super fun, certain mechanics to be really enjoyable, as well as well-designed side objectives and other various quirks. With these being my thoughts on stories in FE, I don't really have a lot to say about the plot in Shadow Dragon. However, I do feel like compared to FE1, it was definitely improved for the better. FE11 added a short 4-map prologue, which kicks off how the game starts. Elise letting herself be captured for Marv's sake, and Marv resolving himself to save her on the boat that escapes. This particular scene is honestly really amazing, and gives so much more to Marv's character that you couldn't find in FE1. To give a short summary, FE11 gives more meat and character to FE1's plot, allowing it to be more memorable and keep a super cool dark atmosphere and tone for the game. For a final note, Shadow Dragon has some great quality of life features and just other general things that make the game super easy to play. Being able to skip enemy phases with the start button is wonderful. You appreciate it even more after dealing with sluggish enemy phases in FE9 and 10 for instance. Being able to easily toggle enemy rages is super nice. Deployment and inventory management is infinitely better compared to FE1 as well, thanks to the convoy actually existing in the prep menu and not having a pitiful 40 item limit. So, what does this all give you? FE11 is a great game, super good map design and well-designed side objectives, tons of versatility with the addition of fortress and reclassing, a difficulty mode available for whatever type of challenge you want, whether you want one of the hardest FE games or a more mild experience, tons of replayability thanks to the aforementioned options, and great quality of life features to make your experience not tedious. not to mention a pretty enjoyable story with a great tone. If for whatever reason you haven't tried the game yet, maybe you're put off by some random person calling the game bad, I insist you should give this game a go. Even if it doesn't end up high in your favorites, I'm sure you'll still have a fun time. There's so much to like in this game, it'd be a shame not to experience it. Thanks for watching.